Welcome to the Derek Loudermilk Show. This is episode 360 with Karen Darke. Today's guest is Karen Darke. She's an adventurer, a world record holder, a world champion, and Paralympic gold medalist in hand cycling. She's an author, a speaker, a coach, and a real incredible human. And it's a real treat for me to have her on. She and I were co-authors in our latest Activate Your Life book, but I'm getting to know her a little bit more today. And she and I have a lot in common. We're both cyclists and adventurers. So it's fun to talk about some of her competition, winning the Rio Olympic gold, and some of her adventures that she's been on through the Himalaya and other parts of the world, and some of the adventures she's planning, including her trip, hopefully this year, to Antarctica, which she's been planning for a long time. Hopefully everything is aligning for her this year. So we'll learn about the logistics for how she makes these adventures happen, and some of her stories of synchronicity and good luck and being in the right place at the right time, and the goodwill of people she's met all around the world. So without further ado, here is Karen Darke. Karen Darke, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you for having me in my reclined, comfortable position.
Yeah, so you just finished training. What's your training look like these days?
I'm trying to figure that out myself. I've stopped training for Paralympic Games, so now it's training for life and health and general wellness and staying strong for projects that we have later this year to go to Antarctica. So yeah, training has shifted a little bit from what it used to be, but I'm still really enjoying it. So riding a bike, going to the gym, ski poling around the streets in my wheelchair, which kind of looks crazy when you live on a Spanish Mediterranean island and you're going around with ski poles. People give you funny looks.
There's a guy who does his Nordic ski practice on rollers in our park, and we haven't really had any snow this year. And it's like, I know he's from Minnesota and he has been here for a couple decades, and he's still like hanging on to he goes skiing there once a year.
Yeah, there are a few teams come from Scandinavia to roller ski train here in Mallorca. So yeah.
Yeah, so you're based mostly in Mallorca these days?
In the winter, I'm in Mallorca, and the summer, Scotland, and yeah, traveling in between. So I guess you'd call me a digital nomad. I guess that's the term that goes with it, but I think I've always been a bit nomadic, so it seems to work.
Amazing. Yeah. I feel like I'm a retired digital nomad. I did that for about 7 years, but we've been in this house, and now I have my office where I get to display all the cool things I picked up on the adventures throughout the years. And I definitely want to talk to you about some of your adventures, because I always have a good time hearing the stories. But I thought maybe we'd start with talking about gold and the number 79. And I was intrigued to find out you were a PhD geologist looking for gold. You're also a gold medal winner in the Rio Games. Can you tell me a little bit about the significance of both gold and that number for you?
So in Rio, there was an interesting thing in the summer before it, that I had developed a minor addiction to a hot drink from a well-known cafe chain, and the barista there one day, because every day I went in to ask for every time I asked for this drink, I said, "Can you make it extra hot, please?" And she said, "Ask for it at 79 degrees because that's the hottest our machine goes to." So of course, my teammates started a joke around this. I was a bit of a diva asking for my drinks at 79 degrees. And so this joke was playing around the whole of the summer of 2016 and lead up to the Rio Paralympics. And then when I won the medal there, I saw a video for Britain about the first 100 medals in the first, so it was called 100 medals in 100 seconds, and discovered that I featured as medal number 79 that I'd won for Britain. And then someone pointed out to me that 79 was the atomic number of gold, which I should have known, but I'd forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And so suddenly this connection and this thread related to gold seemed to come into my life. And yeah, since then, number 79 just kept cropping up in different shapes and forms. And hey, we might say that's the brain and the system of I think it's the reticular activating system that helps us notice things more once we've noticed them. But definitely I've been tuned into that number, and it's appeared in kind of just interesting and bizarre ways. So for example, there's a valley here in Mallorca that I cycle along regularly, and just a few months ago, suddenly there's this stone in the wall in the middle of the valley on its own, and nothing there, with 79 carved into it. And I must have ridden past it so many times for many years. And suddenly it's like, why is there a number 79 in this stone? So yeah, I guess it's kind of led me on this journey. And I decided that I would like to cycle 7 continents in 9 rides. So that became the Paralympic Games, a land speed record, and then 7 continents. So it's all completed apart from one continent, which is Antarctica. And I'm not sure that a bike will be possible there. So been playing around with options, but those quests that I've been on across different continents have all involved other people, usually who've never done anything like that before. So people have been really coming out of their comfort zone. They've maybe never ever ridden a bike. They're trying to lose lots of weight, or they just wanted, they're in some kind of transition in life. So it's been really special to share those journeys with people, some of them close friends, some people that I didn't know well beforehand. And in the process, I realized that when we get out of our comfort zone and challenge ourselves with something new, or with a commitment to do more of something that we already love, then we always discover something about ourselves and maybe find something really quite profound within. And so I started calling that our inner gold. And so other people have been doing Quest 79 projects in search of inner gold. And there's just some really special people and stories have been emerging from a couple of the first early ones, where a lovely man that decided to run a marathon, but he'd only run it, his first marathon, after 79 people had donated blood because someone in his family, a child in his family, needed blood transfusions and had a terminal illness. So yeah, he got 70 people had to send him a photo of them donating the blood, and when 79 people had done it, he ran his first marathon. A young boy who decided to climb 79 mountains in 79 weeks, 79 peaks in 79 weeks, 10 years old at the time, or 11, and did it, raised money for a children's charity in Africa, and at the same time inspired all of his classmates at school to do different kinds of Quest 79s. And some of those were simple things like go outside for 79 minutes a week, or be nicer to my sister 79 times. But somebody wrote 79 anonymous love letters and left them around his town, and someone's been picking up litter consecutively in her community for 79 days, and now has just carried on and done it for many, many days. So wonderful stories, and some of them in the kind of sporting world, but many of them just about caring for our environment or for other people, and sort of that connection and kindness piece.
Yeah, wow, that's fantastic. I didn't realize that other people were doing their own quests. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I don't have it right in front of me to show you, but there's a really popular game in the UK called Top Trumps. It's a card game.
Okay.
And in the process, the owner of Top Trumps offered to make us a Top Trumps Quest 79 card pack. So there are 30 cards in a pack, and every card's got one of these different stories on it. So they're all really inspiring, I think. And it's a really popular game in Britain. I'm not sure how big it is globally, but he donated 5,000 packs for us to sell to raise money for the charity and projects, and we're currently using that for the Polar Possibility.
Amazing. The actual element gold. Actually, here's one thing I'm curious about. Is the medal you get from the Olympics solid gold?
Not solid, coated.
Not solid. It's coated. Okay.
It weighs quite a lot, and the one from Rio has seeds inside it, so you can shake it, you can rattle it. Really? And the bronze, silver, and gold had a different number of seeds, so they have a different sound. So it was to help people that can't see, so they can maybe feel what color the medal is.
Oh, that's fascinating. And is there another medal that's inside that the base of it is made from?
I don't know what the base of it has. I'm not sure, but each medal, I think it weighs half a kilo, so they're significant in weight. It feels significant when you hold it.
Yeah, that's good. It ought to. I mean, should be the best the best medals around. Better than your local 5K finisher medal. And the actual element of gold. Um, do you have any? Do you have gold objects? Do you use gold in some way, like physical gold?
You know what? I never like, for example, I suppose the obvious way people might have gold is jewelry. But well, first of all, you can probably see I don't really wear much jewelry.
Yeah.
And if I chose jewelry, I'd always choose silver. I'm not a big fan of gold for that. Um, but in the lead up to Rio, I did fill my life with gold. So I think I did it deliberately, and but it was kind of interesting the mental effect it had. So I bought some gold kind of Converse pumps. They weren't Converse, but you know that style.
Yeah.
I bought a gold bag. I had a gold phone cover, a gold laptop cover. I talked about Project Gold to people because I found it interesting that in the world of sport, sometimes people speak as if it comes across to me as overconfident, or like how can we ever know? We can never know that we're going to win a race. We can only have I think we can only have belief that we could win it, and desire and focus and intention and all of those things, but we can never really know what the outcome will be on the day. And so for me, calling it Project Gold kept it more experimental. Not, yeah, it kept it more
Mm.
playful. It was like, okay, I do believe if I ever can, then this would be the race it would be possible in. But I suppose it became a bit of an experiment for me to play with the brain, with intention, with maybe some kind of invisible energy. I'm not sure, but it was very interesting how it unfolded because prior to the race in Rio, many things went wrong. I injured my shoulder. I couldn't even push my wheelchair off the bus when I got to Rio. I spent the whole week in the care of physios because I couldn't even get in and out of my bed because my shoulder was so bad. So on the one hand, everything might have felt like it was crumbling inside, like everything you've worked towards, and suddenly you can't even push your wheelchair. How can you win a gold medal? And the other part of me just kept going, this is perfect. It's making me rest, and that's absolutely what I need. It's all sort of, it's all just aligning. It's great. So I think the power of our mind to reframe things and see things in the way that helps us is really incredible.
I did an experiment 2 years ago during the first state championship. So I race bikes as well. And it was a state championship. They changed the course from a normal, very hilly course to a flat course for this particular state championship because of the pandemic. And as soon as they changed it, I was like, I knew that I was going to win. And it was this knowing this is my shot because normally I'm in the last in my category because I'm quite heavy for a cyclist, and it didn't. I ended up winning, but I didn't win the race. There was actually a couple people from a different state that were ahead of me in the finish, but I ended up getting the medal and the jersey in sort of a unexpected way. But there was this knowing before the race, like this is my race. I'm going to win it. It's already
Mm-hmm.
mine. And I've only had that experience maybe 3 times, but every time I've known that I was going to win, I won, and it was all, either by a hair or very dramatic, or weird circumstances. But it's kind of an interesting experience to have that sort of knowing or expectation of a result like that.
Yeah, I agree. So I suppose I wouldn't go as far as to say it was I absolutely knew because clearly we don't until reality catches up. But there was something inside me that really, it was a kind of knowing. It was like just a deep sense of this is the one that you could do it in, and
So do
a
you
kind of
think
trust.
that subconsciously you knew, but your logical mind was telling you like, oh, just be cautious, like you don't count your chickens before they hatch, but that
Yeah,
deep down you actually did know?
something like that probably. I think so, yeah. And actually it's interesting the project that is manifesting this year, the Pole of Possibility, which is to go to the center of Antarctica to the South Pole, and to it's something which has been in my energy field, if you like, for 10 years. It's 9 years since we did the last training trip for it with a completely different team. The team's changed out completely, but somewhere along the way, there's always been something that hasn't felt right with it. And this year, literally feels like I know we're going in December. How we're going to get all the money to go, I don't know, but I just know that we will. And it's really weird how after 10 years it's just suddenly shifted. And there's something about things coming into alignment somehow. And it's something deep inside oneself that suddenly feels kind of solid, and you just know it's happening now.
Yeah. Did you almost go before in sometime in the last 10 years and it just didn't work out?
Yeah, we've never managed to pull the funding together. Then at one point we got a sponsor, and then after COVID they pulled out, and we had a great guide, and he very sadly died in crossing the Greenland ice cap. There's just been so many
Hmm.
setbacks and various things which have kept setting it back, and of course the last few years COVID. So mhm.
Could you say more about what it feels like right now? Why it feels inevitable this year?
I think partly it's when you feel like you've got the right. I feel like we've got the right team. It feels like we're really aligned and connected in the message. Maybe there's something around to go to a continent like Antarctica. It's always felt important to me to. I mean, it's such a privilege to get to go to a continent like that, which is so precious, so far away, so expensive to get to. And so I've always felt really strongly like the story and the reason needs to be right. I suppose what one's inner why and the inner motivation. And maybe there's something about when we line that up inside of ourselves, we're able to communicate it more clearly to others, or to come with more energy to others that feels more solid to others. And so other people join in, and that's what actually makes things happen.
Mm.
So similar to the medal, when I called it Project Gold and I really believed and I was excited, that energy was transmitting to other people. And so I suddenly had a whole team of engineers at Williams Formula One making me a bike, and had all of their investment of time and effort in there as well. And so there's something about that internal alignment that builds the belief, that builds the ability to radiate something with it to other people, and then that collectively generates more, like a snowball gathering size.
So is something more in alignment this year for you about that project?
It feels that way, yeah. The team's shrunk right down. A couple of people dropped out. That one of them was my brother actually, and I always thought I'd love to do this with my brother, but something about the team just slimming down to the bare minimum. It's just myself and Iona, who's 21, and she's gone through a lot of challenges in her life so far. She was part of a Manchester a bombing in Manchester at an
Mm.
Ariana Grande concert, and so there's some commonality in our stories about trauma and challenge, and then the power of team, of movement and nature to heal. And I think the alignment of our stories and what we believe in and how we want to share that with others has brought a kind of freshness to it that suddenly feels right.
Wonderful. And you're debating between a ski and a bike for this expedition?
Well, my dream was to bike there, um, but I did have a bike built for the snow, and
Mm-hmm.
9 years ago trialed it, and it was a disaster. We ended up just skiing around Norway, towing the bike like a sort of dog on a leash. When I say we, I think my brother ended up towing it a lot of the time. And actually, if there's another bike, there is somebody that's cycled to the South Pole on a tricycle,
Hmm.
somebody able-bodied with a on a recumbent bike with her legs. But she did it following an ice road which runs from the American base in Antarctica into the South Pole. So actually the logistics of getting to the American base and following the ice road is very complex and expensive, and it requires first flying into the South Pole and then going out along the road that you then come back in along, and nothing feels natural or flowy about it. It's very sort of constructed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that doesn't feel right. But actually, to ride a bike across the virgin plateau of Antarctica probably isn't going to work.
Because
I'm
there's
hope
crevasses and various other obstacles in this
it's
snow
it,
variation.
it's not so much that because once you're up on the plateau, that I think hopefully we're going to avoid most of the crevasse zones, but it's more the texture of the snow and the what was happening at the snow in Antarctica will be very different to Norway, but you were breaking through the crust and then it was just the effort involved in trying to propel a
Mm,
bike was immense compared to the glide that you would get with a ski, or a little bit
yeah,
more glide at least. So
that makes sense. Wow, fascinating.
I'm
Uh,
hoping we might be able to take one down there. There's been a special kind of ice. There's a company in the UK called Ice Trikes, Inspired Cycle Engineering, and they've, in conjunction with two brothers in Israel, have made a special hand bike, which could tackle tough off-road conditions. But because of COVID, I've not been able to get to Israel to trial it and test it. So at the moment, that remains in Israel. But hoping that I may be able to get to that and try it out. So we'll see.
yeah. I'm curious about your equipment, your different bikes, your hand bikes that you use for these adventures and your racing. Just what are the basics of? I know you're cranking with sort of two hands together generally, and how do you turn? Are you turning with your hands also?
So on a hand bike, you turn with your hands also. So most people think that you would pedal asynchronously like you do on a regular bike, like the 180 degrees out for each limb.
Yeah.
But actually on a hand bike, you pedal in sync. So your arms are moving around together. Because it's also how you generate power. And because I'm paralyzed from the chest down, a lot of the power I generate comes from my upper back and actually from my neck and pushing with my head. So pedaling together is just a much more kind of balanced and powerful way to generate power. And also to control the steering, you just push slightly more with one arm than the other, but it's very easy. Whereas if you're pedaling alternately, it somehow doesn't seem to have quite the
Mm.
same effect. When I first began riding hand bikes, which is a long time ago now, I once went years before I became a competitive cyclist to I think it was the first ever European hand cycling championships. And at that point, there was a mix of people pedaling in sync and out of sync. But it's definitely moved to everybody being in the same in
Oh, so they
sync
were
way
still
now. So
figuring it out back then.
yeah.
Oh, that's
And even
cool.
even now there are hand bikes that clip on to wheelchairs, like clip on pedals, and some of those are still asynced. So maybe it's personal preference, but on the whole, it's more powerful to just push with your arms together, push and pull.
And so, am I hearing you correctly that if you're paralyzed from the chest down, you're not able to use the pectoral muscles to do the pushing?
My pecs work. So I'm
Okay.
paralyzed from kind of right in the middle of the breastbone. It's the third thoracic bone. So I don't have any abdominal muscles, but my pecs still work and don't have many intercostal muscles. So I'm very bad at coughing. It sounds quite kind of, and I'm pretty bad at laughing. Coughing and laughing don't come easily. But yeah, the lats muscles still work, the traps, the trapezius, and the pecs. And I'm fortunate. I did break my neck, so I'm very fortunate that I didn't damage my spinal cord in my neck. So it means I
Mm.
still have use of my triceps and my arm strength. Yeah.
And so, you're generating force sort of all the way around the circular motion?
There's always a dead spot. Just you can imagine, just when you're at the closest, kind of when you're moving from a push to a pull, at either end of the pedal cycle, there's
Yeah.
always a little dead spot, and most of us use oval chain rings to try and remove some of the dead spot in pedaling.
Yeah. I actually switched to oval chain rings on my bike this year. Oh, so amazing. And it was so weird going back to riding a normal round chainring. It feels so clunky. So one of my favorite things, part of the reason I love bike racing is the strategy of it. I was never really the top athlete, but I can use strategy to win races because of drafting and team tactics and all that stuff. Does that come into play in a hand cycle road race? Is there as much team tactics and drafting? Because I know you guys are
If
really low to the ground.
Well, there's lots of drafting. There are, unfortunately, in women's hand cycling, there aren't really any team tactics because there's not many women doing it. So I've never really had. I think at one point there were two female hand cyclists for the UK, so we did get to work together a little bit and try and employ some tactics. But certainly that's one aspect of racing that I have enjoyed at various points. My my challenge is that in a lot of road races, it's not been my forte. My forte is really time trialing, where you're just going against the clock on your own. often in a road race scenario, I'm people call me a diesel engine, but I'm very good at going for a long time and quite powerfully, but not great at the sprints. So actually, it's quite
Hmm.
hard to get really involved in tactics when you don't have a lot of sprint because even though I've spent many times trying to focus on it and improve it was kind of fractional improvements and never really enough. You have to be ideally good at getting kicks so you can break away and chase and do those kinds of
Yeah.
things. But I seem to be fairly much a kind of one speed pony.
Yeah, I hear that. And then what about descending down curvy roads? When you're on two wheels, you lean into the corners, but if you're on three, I'm imagining if you go around a really fast one, you could get like flung
Yeah,
over. Is that a thing?
it is a thing. Yeah, I once raced the World Championships in Greenville, South Carolina, and it was like hot and sticky, but technical. There were kind of quite sharp corners and roundabouts, and I definitely was up on one wheel on numerous occasions, and you just feel that kind of point of topple. And I have turned and rolled my bike in races before, and ended up out of the race with a broken nose. So
Oh
it's
wow.
definitely a thing. And when you roll a handbike, clearly the first point of impact is your head and face. So not ideal. And and you can lean, so I have got quite good at leaning, and really I'm quite happy to have retired out of that scene now because sometimes racing downhill, I think 2015 World Championships was really very hilly. There's a huge descent in Switzerland and you just had to take all your bottle down there with you and make sure you didn't roll it on the corner at the bottom. So it's yeah.
Yeah, and I notice, I'm a dad now. I notice I got a little more timid um, in the corners after becoming a dad. And so then there's these 21-year-old kids that are, fighting for a career in pro cycling, and they're willing to, elbow me just to get to the apex first. And after that, I was like, I'm okay going a little bit slower down this.
I'm not entirely sure it's connected to being a dad. I think maybe it's just as we go through life and have more near misses, maybe we get a little bit more reluctant to keep putting ourselves in such a vulnerable position and more grateful for the fact that we're still here and intact and able to move.
Yeah, I definitely did notice a shift on becoming a dad, and in a lot of very subtle ways, like just being a little more protective of various things, and sort of also, gathering more resources to a
Mhm.
degree, knowing that I need to have sort of access to more abundance. And as it's been an interesting process. My kids are 3 and 5 now. Um, Going back to your Rio gold medal, I heard you in another interview talking about that you didn't feel very good that day. You just mentioned earlier you were injured going into that, and then your race. You said you never really felt comfortable during the race, but you won. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that worked out that way?
Yeah, it's interesting. You probably can relate to this as you race a bike or anyone listening that does kind of sport things. Sometimes you just really get into that flow zone where you're lost in time. You kind of got no real concept of where you are and what of time passing, and time is compressed in some ways. And maybe maybe that's what I expected it to be like for a race where I was going to finally win a gold medal. I thought it would be all of those things. And I did have a previous experience where I won a gold in a World Cup, and it was very much like that. It was just completely this amazing experience. It just felt the whole thing just felt great. Whereas the Rio race didn't. I obviously went in with this injury, so I was aware that I had a sore shoulder, but actually mentally, I was really solid.
Mm,
So I think that was the thing. Even though physically things were clearly out of balance, mentally it didn't. I wasn't off balance at all. I really believed that I could still do that. However, halfway through the race, my chain fell off, and I had to
wow.
physically stop, put the brake on, pick the chain up with my fingers, and put it back on. And of course, at that point, I did have a bit of a mental wobble of thinking, "That's it, blown it. Like, there's no way I can win a medal now when I've had to actually stop because the margins are so tiny."
Yeah.
but I just thought, hey, you can't give up, so just get back on it. So maybe that made me push harder. I don't know. But when I finished and crossed the finish line, I honestly thought I'd blown it, and I really thought I probably wasn't going to even be on the podium. I thought I'd probably come fourth or worse. Well,
What do you think
I'm
that
not,
cost
I'm
you?
not
About
new.
30 seconds? What do you
I
think that
believe it
cost
was.
you?
I think it was about 30 seconds. Yeah, because
Yeah.
to actually to come to a complete standstill and then have to start up again, probably about that. And in the end, I won the race by I think it was 15 seconds, or was it 12 seconds? Anyway, there's something weird happened. It feels like something weird happened. It feels like time was distorted or distant. It just something feels like there was something messing with that. It doesn't seem right that I won it. But there we go. But at the same time, it does seem right. It seems like it was meant to be. The stake was in the ground. I believed it, and it happened.
Here's a interesting thought experiment that just occurred to me. There's all these Olympians. Let's take an event, any event, 100-meter dash, whatever it is. They all come in with varying degrees of belief, and obviously their training and their natural talent and all these things. Um, how much of an influence do you think the mental training and the belief training is affecting the outcomes of these really tight events?
I think massively so. I don't know if I could put a percentage on it. I've heard people say, maybe it's 80. I think it was Ranulph Fiennes, who's a famous British sort of explorer character. Once said that he attributed climbing Everest at age 70 or 70 something to being 80% mental and 20% physical. I don't know what I would put on it because there's been other races. I can't remember the year now. Was it 20? Anyway, I did the World Championships in 2019, I think it was, and or maybe it was 2018, and I went in absolutely solid that I trained really well, that I could pull it off and maintain my place on the team. Because to maintain my place, it became clear that I needed to make the podium, and I missed the podium, so I didn't make it. But mentally, I thought I was solid with it, but it didn't quite work. So but I think there's something quite subtle in that mental solidity. Sometimes it's a fine line between us trying to convince ourselves and somewhere deep beneath it
Mm-hmm.
feeling really solid. And maybe, I don't know the answer, but it's clearly a massive part of it. But I think there's something about the depth to which it goes, which has an influence.
Yeah, it's reminding me of something that I have a lot of clients, and I'm sure you do as well, that deal with this imposter syndrome. And they can intellectually understand that they are the right person for the job, or that they should be the one giving the instructions, as a CEO or whatever it might be. But inside, there's something that they're not convinced somewhere deep in there. And
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting process of how does someone actually come to believe that no, you should be doing this. You're the best in the world at this, and like you have a right to be here, like telling people how it is.
I think for my thoughts on that are that imposter syndrome sometimes is about, I wonder if it's culturally acquired, like something about not sticking your head up above the parapet, not wanting to sort of stand out or be different from other people. Maybe it's a
Mm,
part of us that really wants to not stand out, that wants to be like everybody else so we can all be connected. And I've certainly dealt within myself and my own journey. I still struggle with sometimes a sense of separation. I'm kind of everyone's in not everyone's, but I'm kind of like the inspiring friend or the inspiring figure, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's amazing what you do," and it feels like sometimes that just separates me because I'm still human, so I still go through the struggle, and I want to connect with people. I don't want to be something that's kind of on a pedestal somewhere that people think, "Oh, I could never do that or be like that," or I just so I kind of resist it. I resist standing out or resist over the years. I've resisted perhaps taking leadership in different situations. For a number of years, I resisted stepping up to being a coach because I kind of felt like, who am I to coach someone or think that I might know anything better than anyone else? But actually, I think if we just if we just keep reminding ourselves that we're all human, we're all flawed, and we're all perfect, and we all have different experiences, and sometimes those experiences can be really helpful to other people. So just kind of embrace who we are, I think.
It's funny, as I was preparing for this interview, I was seeing all of your accomplishments and feeling a little bit of like, ooh, maybe I should have done more with my life. Because you have a lot of pretty amazing things you've done. And I got into that comparison mode a little bit. Um,
So there you go. So let's
so
just
there
delete
you
all of that.
go.
Because I look at other people and think, well, I haven't done all these other things. When people ask me what I'm inspired by, often the people that inspire me are people that are living sort of maybe less adventurous lives in the way that I do, but they've built families and communities and committed to things that they're really building something deep and connected around them. Whereas sometimes I feel like I haven't done any of that bit. And yeah, we can always compare ourselves. I think we all put other people in places that actually create separation from them and us. And I try and it makes me giggle when I think about my career in sport and the fact that when people win races, there's this podium with all these different levels with the gold higher up, the silver another level, and the bronze another level. Whereas my whole life is kind of spent trying to equalize where we see everybody. So it's kind of interesting.
Hmm. Let's talk a little bit about this separation concept, because I've been thinking a lot about this myself. And first, I think a lot of the problems we see today arise because of separation. So like, hoarding of resources or barriers to keep these people out and us in, or demonizing someone because it feels like they're, someone else. And on a level of physics, right? Fundamentally, we're all made of the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't be separate from each other. Um, my work with psychedelics has shown me that to some degree, like the edge of my atoms of my skin are right going next to the atoms of the air, and it becomes no longer, there's no boundary there. But yet we've created a world full of these boundaries and separation. And fundamentally, if we are seeing our connectedness, then that will help us change, I think, a lot of the systems and structures that are causing problems for us.
Yeah.
Would love to get your thoughts on that.
It's very topical because before our chat, I have been out on my bike for a few hours, and in the middle of it, I don't know how on earth, sometimes you just have these kind of slightly weird or altered experiences. And I just found myself really not feeling like I was my body, just kind of, I don't know how to describe it, just that sense of we're all the same. We're all kind of, I suppose like spiritual gurus talk about the oneness, but it's not very often that I have experienced it as a real thing. But today on my ride, I did. And I think I agree with you. I think maybe, I can, speaking from my own perspective, I fear separation. I fear just what I described. I fear being put apart from other people or being seen as different or more accomplished, or like I just want to feel connected. But almost my fear of separation probably keeps me separated. So sometimes I think that saying, it's a bit cheesy, but what we resist persists. And I kind of, yeah, I know that I'm going to just work more and more on just feeling that sense of oneness. And I think for me, connecting with nature helps me feel that. So very lucky when I'm in Mallorca and in Scotland to be in beautiful mountainscapes where you kind of sense that bigger being. And yeah, I don't know what I'm saying here.
Well, I'm curious about your experience today. Were you out riding by yourself?
I was out riding by myself, yeah. The first hour of my ride was unexpected. I just rode to a coffee shop, had a coffee, got chatting to a stranger, carried on with. I had this intention to go out and do some hard training, but then I bumped into someone else I knew in a lane and ended up chatting to her for 20 minutes. Then I'm like, okay, I've not got much time left now. And then I just found myself going up the hill and doing some 1 minute intervals. But in the middle of all of that, just this kind of quite profound experience came about.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I have a exercise that I've been playing with that I want to share with you. It's like when I'm sitting around a dinner table and I imagine myself looking through the eyes of each person at the dinner table and
Hmm.
seeing me, but through their eyes, and then going to another person and seeing the whole scene. And it's a way for me of feeling like we're all connected in that way.
Hmm. Yeah, I play with it often. I haven't really thought about specifically looking through the eyes of, but just putting myself into someone else's life or imagining walking in that, being them for a part of their day and kind of feeling that experience. And it definitely helps just sort of bring a different perspective and yeah, see things in a different way. Kind of changing, swap. Is it in a coaching role? You that's a deliberate activity, isn't it? Or in counseling as well. But just to imagine someone sitting in someone else's place and seeing it from another perspective. That yeah.
Yeah, and I'm enjoying imagining what it would be like to be racing, hand cycles or hand cycle adventures. Another piece that I wondered about was, as I travel around the world and adventure, I have my own limits of what I'm scared of or physically capable of still, but because you're paralyzed, I'm imagining that sort of limits you even more. Um, and I know you've done, multiple trips across the Himalaya on your hand bike. So what I'm wondering about is where you notice yourself running up against the actual physical limitations
Mhm.
versus other types of limitations.
Where do I notice it, or how does that?
Yeah, has there ever been a moment when you're like, "Ooh, I want to climb up that waterfall. Oh, but it's not really accessible for me, or I want to."
So early after being paralyzed, that was how I was a lot of the time. But if we focus on what we haven't got anymore or what we can't do, it doesn't seem to me a great route to happiness. So when I was looking at other people's leg muscles and wishing I could move them or wishing I could climb up this mountain or ice climb up a waterfall, it generally made me pretty miserable. So a friend very early on in my process of being paralyzed, he'd been paralyzed in a skiing accident, said to me, just try when you're looking at the mountains next time to imagine that you're a giant and imagine that you've got a giant's hand and imagine that you're running this hand over all the mountain tops and feeling what it would be like to be there, feel the streams and the heather and the rocks and the changes in texture. And it sounded kind of crazy, but I tried it and I just took my mind, a bit like you just said, go into someone else's shoes and
Hmm.
look through their eyes. But it was kind of like I took myself up into the mountains in my imagination. And it was really very cool. It kind of changed my experience of being there. And it made me feel more connected with being up there rather than frustrated that I wasn't physically up there.
Yeah.
So for many years I tend not to have that. I don't feel that. I don't have that focus. I suppose when I'm adventuring and the physical limitations become more sometimes around the more difficult emotions that I might experience are around maybe vulnerability and dependency. So again, a bit like separation and connection, I think dependency and independence are another interesting sort of pairing because we all want that autonomy to have independence to make decisions and take action in the way that we would like. But it's curious to me that I often put myself into situations where I remove that independence, where I might not have my wheelchair. We kayaked from Canada to Alaska for 10 weeks and I had no wheelchair for 10 weeks. So in that time, I was entirely dependent on my amazing teammates, and they had to get me physically carry me out of the kayak and up the beach at night, and then we'd sleep on the beach, and I would cook and do what I could to be part of the team from one position. But
So you
it's
kayak from where to where?
Vancouver to Juneau in Alaska, so it was
Okay,
about 10
you
weeks.
were on the coast and then coming into shore each night. Okay.
Yeah, we just camped on beaches in the evenings. And on the rare occasion we got to a town, it was like shopping trolleys and wheelbarrows and fish baskets that were my mobility. And there was another guy that was paralyzed too. So there were two of us that couldn't walk. And it was, yeah,
Wow.
an interesting interplay. So, um,
I guess that's what
yeah.
I was wondering about. So you're just having someone help you find a way to help you move around.
So never in my day-to-day life, like I live alone. I live independently. There's certain little jobs I might not be able to do, and then I'll ask for help. But generally speaking, day to day, I'm fully just independent. So and I love that, but it's also curious to me that at times I think I just when I go on a journey, an expedition, an adventure, it's that the desire to be part, excuse me, to be part of a team and to experience nature and these wonderful wilderness environments is greater to me than the cost of the things that I give up to do it, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, and I guess the reason why I'm asking is just, almost from a logistics point of view, like just, the planning, like obviously you're trying to figure out the equipment, then you had someone on this kayaking trip that was helping you, onto the shore, and just, kind of the nitty gritty of like how you actually like make it happen. I think I saw a picture of like a tandem bike for crossing the Himalaya where there's someone pedaling with their legs and then you're in the front. um, I mean, these things are all solvable sort of
My
problems.
life my life is one big challenge essentially, yeah, and there's lots of logistical challenges involved with that. And for example, we're going back to Norway in soon to do another journey to train for Antarctica, and we want to take a journey across the plateau up in one of the Norwegian plateaus, and
Mm-hmm.
the start and the finish point will be different. So I just introduced to the team just last night at a meeting, oh yeah, we'll need to think about where we leave my wheelchair or how it gets from one end to the other, or you guys are going to have to help me get in my ski in the morning from the floor. There's just always logistical things involved, and I think it all comes down to planning, thinking ahead, and communicating, and then yeah, the hearts and minds of a team.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. So our part of the reason why we're able to connect is our mutual acquaintance, Glenn, who is, I think we were both in his book about adventure that's due to come
Hmm.
out. And then you were part of our Activate project. This is actually the first time we're talking. And he suggested a few things to ask you about. And I was really curious about the spirit surgeon, the no anesthetic surgeon that you went to see somewhere in South America. It sounded really intriguing. Could you talk a little bit about that?
It's a long time ago. It's over 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So I think I can't remember the year I went. It might have been 2000, 2001, that kind of time. And I read a book by a Japanese journalist called In Search of Brazil's Quantum Surgeon. And I was absolutely fascinated. It was a book recommended to me by someone that was treating me at the time with acupuncture.
Mm-hmm.
And I just noticed that when I was treated with acupuncture, every time I went, there was a huge amount of emotion came out of me. So that obviously got me interested and intrigued by what we don't see, the invisible energy that we maybe hold in the body, etc. He recommended the book. The book blew my mind. It was about a guy in Brazil that operates on people with a rusty knife and no anesthesia, and apparently bloodless, painless surgeries, and people were getting incredible healings. And there was a story in the book about someone he'd operated on who was paralyzed, and how this guy had stood up even though his legs had no muscles, like very a lot of muscle atrophy because he'd been in a wheelchair for so long, but still stood up and took some steps. So it wasn't something I'd ever thought about since becoming paralyzed. I guess I just went into the acceptance mode of it. Not entirely, like initially, I spent days staring at my feet, willing my toes to move, imagining moving them, wiggling them, in hospital. And then it reached the point after a number of months or however long that I kind of just went, okay, it seems like nothing's coming. So I got on with my life, and I can say I'd reached a point where I felt pretty happy and had lots of things. So it took me by surprise. It wasn't like I'd gone in search of some weird and wacky solution to try and walk again, but this book really captured my imagination. And then I had leave. There was a special offer on with British Airways to Rio, and weirdly, as I was sitting with it, thinking, "Am I crazy?" I'd booked my ticket. There was this group of American. I forgot to say in the back of the book was an email address for an American guy who spent many years making films about the work of Dr. Fritz in South America.
Mm.
And so I just emailed and said I'd love to see the film, and he said, "Well, actually, it's still not finished, but there's a group of American doctors and consultants going down in a couple of weeks' time to meet him and study his work. He is their contact, and there was one place left in the group." So I ended up
Perfect.
joining this group of American doctors and surgeons and going down there, and yeah, just really quite crazy experience. And but in that run up to that, where I was kind of like, what am I doing? My logical brain kicking in and just going, what? This is crazy. I pulled a book off my shelf that I'd had at home for a number of years, and it was about spiritual healing. And I'd never really read it or engaged with it, and literally just saw it on my shelf, pulled it out, opened it up, and the very page I opened it at was about Dr. Fritz, and I never knew there was a chapter about him in this book.
Oh,
And
wow.
there were other little strange little things happened. I was in a hotel in Holland for work. There was a Bible at the side of the bed. I'm not religious, but I picked it up, opened it at a page where a guy that was paralyzed was healed by Jesus and walked. I was like, oh my God, why have I just read? Literally, that's the page, the only thing I read. So all these weird little things happened. I was like, okay, I'll just go and see what this is all about. So I went and I was operated on, and it was bloodless and painless, and it blew my mind, and it's a pretty incredible experience. But clearly, I'm not physically walking. But I also believe that anything is possible in this world. I really do, and I think that really expanded my mind into the fact that we live with certain sets of paradigms and beliefs, and that actually in other parts of the same world, of this same planet, people have very different belief systems. And so it kind of made me just break down a lot of belief systems that I'd maybe
Mm.
grown up in, and perhaps that opened up a lot of possibility in other ways.
Yeah. Is this guy still working, this doctor, or
Well, he was,
have
I
people
think
study him more?
the one I saw, I think he was a third Brazilian. So he channels the spirit of I think it sounds crazy, and of a deceased German surgeon who was called Dr. Fritz, who was a World War II surgeon. So he was
Ah.
apparently the third Brazilian to channel his spirit. And of course, there's plenty in the press about it. I mean, he was performing surgeries illegally because he's not a doctor. So in the real life, he's a telecommunications engineer. Um, his real
Really?
life name is Rubens Faria, and now
Huh.
I think he's not doing that anymore. I'm not sure. I've lost threads with it. I mean, I think he maybe was shammed as it all being some kind of, I don't know, but he never took any money for anything. There was no money involved at all. So for me, it's like, well, why would someone? And it was a profound experience in many ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. It's almost like so if multiple people have channeled the same doctor, it's like the Dalai Lama, incarnating so many times. Uh, hmm, that's interesting. Oh,
It was a very interesting period of my life, and it wasn't just Brazil. There was quite a lot of Americans in the group came together to get him to come to Maui in the Hawaiian Islands and do some work there. So I ended up going back there, having a second operation, and watching
hmm,
lots of other people be healed, and it was very interesting.
fantastic. Yeah. Oh, maybe we'll chat some more about that sometime. Have there been other moments? I know, so we've already talked about the 79 showing up a bunch, and then we just talked about the signs that were confirming for you to go see this channeling doctor. Have there been other sets of synchronicities like that pushed you along on a path?
Good question. They're definitely the kind of most significant ones that I bring to mind. So, I mean, plenty of other little tiny examples where you maybe have a thought, you're not sure, and then something happens. You go, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, uh, that's too weird that just happened. That I'm going to listen to that. But they've been more kind of one-off things rather than a little sequential thing that led me to something kind of as big as those two things have.
Yeah. Another thing Glenn suggested I ask you about was a trip to Bhutan. Is that something you're planning?
I've always been very, actually, as long ago as 30 years ago, just after I was paralyzed, and I would, yeah, it must be like 25 years ago. I remember having a fascination with Bhutan. And I remember it was before email really existed. And I remember faxing the Kingdom of Bhutan to try and see if I could find any way to go there and experience it. I've always been very fascinated by this country. I think I have an attraction anyway to Himalayan countries, mountains, the culture, Tibet, something about the energy of these places that I'm very, very attracted to. And Bhutan is one of the Himalayan countries that I've still never physically been to. But it's the only carbon negative country in the world, and they measure and take economic decisions based on gross national happiness rather than gross national product. So I just feel like they're so forward thinking in so many ways, and they have this concept of compassionate conservation, and it just I can't really talk about it because I haven't been there, but my whole sense of it and exploring the country with now some people I know who are Bhutanese and people that work there and live there, it just strikes me as a very special place that the world could learn from.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, a lot of new frames of thinking, maybe more in the lines of our, removing separation. Could you check
Yeah,
your mic for me really quick? It's sounding a little muffled. I don't know if maybe it's got hidden down there in your
is
shirt
that
for
better?
me. Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Yeah, so I would love, and the other thing I've been really wanting to do, I guess, after the Quest 79 journeys that I've taken across continents, is to begin to take other people on journeys where maybe, where we just have deep conversations, and kind of taking a journey with someone for me is always an incredible way to have a different experience, because it's not, it evolves, it's unfolding. We can have conversations together, you get reflection time apart. I think there's so much power in, it's like having a walk and a talk with someone as opposed to sitting across a desk from them. Like, the energy's so different. So it's always been a real dream of mine to take other people on a journey where we're asking deeper questions and exploring things together, and a little bit of a coaching kind of context, or reflecting on things and sharing that experience. So I'm developing a journey across Bhutan to take people on, hopefully this October. But if Bhutan still, well, we've got it all ready and prepared. I can certainly send you the link. But I'm hopeful. Apparently, Bhutan is likely to open it, but the borders are open. But at the moment, you still have to quarantine when you enter. But apparently, that's probably due to change in the spring.
That's very exciting. I'd like to go. Maybe you put a little idea in my head there. That'd be fun to go.
It'd be wonderful to have you.
Yeah. It's reminding me, I mean, we've had guests on our show before, like Francis Tapon. He's an MBA, and he went to Africa for 5 years. He went to every country and climbed the highest mountain in every country. But one of his main quests, if you will, was to find the best ideas that he could bring back to the Western world in terms of business structures and innovation and things like that. So there's always fertile ground to, discover some concept, some way of being. And Bhutan seems like it could be very fertile.
Yeah, my real aspiration for that journey, there's a risk of it being, just another trip where people go and it's kind of a holiday. Because I'd like, I have organized the option for it to be a cycle journey across the country as well. So people, if they want to, can take the journey by bike. There'll be two groups, but we'll be together all the time. But the actual physical passage will either be by bike or in a vehicle and then walking. So I would love it if the people that what I'm putting out there is that the people that come are, they're interested in change, in connection, in making a difference in their communities, and bringing back ideas and talking about those ideas, and just going a bit, going kind of a little bit deep on things, and having that exploration together, the inner exploration as well as the outer exploration.
Yeah. So you've got Antarctica, Norway, Bhutan on
Yeah,
tap for this year.
it seems we've just come out of the 2 year lockdown. In Spain, we weren't allowed to go out at all. There was like 10 weeks where you were physically not allowed to leave your house unless
Oh,
you
that's terrible.
were holding the receipts that you'd been to the supermarket, and it was heavily policed. So it seems to maybe I've gone for the contrast.
Yeah. Um, maybe a good place to sort of wrap. One more thing I was kind of curious about is on these adventures, especially the Himalaya, maybe have you picked up what have you sort of learned culturally? What ideas have you come back beyond simply, from the adventure side, but what about the vibe of the place that you've picked up?
Mhm. So I guess the overriding sense is that the less people have material in the world, the more that they seem to extend to others. And the kindness that I've received in some of these journeys, especially Himalayan countries and places where people have less, the heart and the smiles and the kindness has been immense. And so, I think sometimes in developed countries, we look at other countries that have less and think we're fortunate, but in a way, I think there's so much that less developed countries have inside, which is, we are absolutely bereft of. We're in a desert where we don't have them, that the connection and the
Mm,
kindness and the support. And of course we have it, like we all experience it within our friendship circles and our families, but it's kind of less, it somehow feels less or limited or not quite as all encompassing. The number of times I have big memories in Kyrgyzstan of being invited into this family's home, a very, very simple mud home, almost no food, but they wanted us to sleep in the main room with all the food that they could possibly give us. They gave us names, like local names. They wanted us to stay. They wanted us to stay with them and be part of the family. And I can't think of anywhere in the more developed world where that would happen. It'd be like, well, God, that's enough of them. Let's get rid of them. So
yeah.
just a really different feel of community and sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can imagine, right, that's really filling them up. There's like a great joy in for them to be able to like give you as much as they possibly can.
Absolutely. And a journey in one of the quest journeys was in 2018, following the river Ganges from its source in the Himalayas in a village called Gangotri to Varanasi, which is its spiritual sort of sacred center where all the bodies are burned on the ghats and things. And that was just an incredible. I mean, it was on one level, it was high stress, but it didn't feel high stress. But it was like being in some kind of computer game trying to stay alive on the roads with everything from a donkey to a bike with scaffolding sideways on the back of it from a truck and just crazy objects and danger everywhere. But it got you into such a zone to kind of navigate it. And as we cycled, it was like the Pied Piper. We just gathered people and school children on old clunky bicycles and people on mopeds. And sometimes when we were near villages and towns, it just felt like we were just gathering this mass of people and kindness. And it never felt threatening. There were times when we were surrounded by a crowd of, I don't know, hundreds of people. And I would be right down on my handbike and just no sign of sky anymore because there's just so many people
Yeah.
crowding over you. And then a policeman would come along and just sort of curious what's happening, but someone would ask if you were okay and offer you some water or go and buy you some biscuits, and it's just curiosity but absolute connection. People would come into our rooms wherever we were staying and just come and sit on the bed and hang out, and it was amazing. It was like a real journey of love and connection.
I mean, that's one of the coolest experiences I think that I haven't had that much, but I hear it from adventurers all the time. I see it in adventure films in Africa or wherever. When you arrive in the village and the whole village comes out to like check out who is this stranger? If there was a stranger walking down my street, I mean, everyone's a stranger walking down my street unless I actually know
Mm-hmm.
them. It's,
Mm-hmm.
we would all come out of our houses just to check them out. But that's such a fascinating thing, and they come and they like check out the, like clothes, and they like look at your bike, and
Yeah.
what fun. Where is there anything I haven't asked you about
Oh
that
God, I'm sure.
that you
I'm
want
sure
to
there's a
talk
million.
about?
I'm sure there's a million things that we could talk about. A very, very interesting conversation with you. Thanks. No, I mean it's been really a pleasure to explore some of these topics with you, and I guess really there are no answers, but it's interesting to explore them. And I suppose I just one of the things that's been just come to mind again today as well is just that the duality of everything. And I guess maybe we just need to embrace both sides of everything. Like maybe we need to embrace our dependency and our independency. We need to embrace our separation and our uniqueness as well as our connection. All the duality that exists. I think sometimes we fear one side or the other, and maybe it's that fear that keeps things from kind of somehow balancing in a way that's really whole and rich. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a really, and I'm aware of your, of the times when you are saying you're dependent on someone else to lift you out of a kayak or something, and being totally like free of the ego attachment to like I should be able to do this all myself. And yeah, and at the same time being such an independent person, right, to do all the things that you do. That's fascinating.
Hey, I'm not saying I've got any of it solved. The eternal mystery. But yeah, I think I suppose that whenever I suppose at the simplest level, a lot of it, I used to. I remember once having a treatment or a session with a guy that kind of does energy coaching, and at the time I was feeling really, really down and quite. I'll use the word depressed, but I would never ever have used the word depressed. And he kind of picked up on it and he said, "So basically you're depressed." I'm like, no, I'm not depressed. I'm just, and it's like, what's your, and he said to me, "What's your resistance to saying, yeah, you're depressed?" I was like, well, I don't get depressed. And it was like kind of this thing of, I don't do that, but it's in resisting something, we're kind
Yeah.
of doing it more. And it really made me go, actually, it's fine to say I'm depressed at the moment. That's all right. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think sometimes we resist the negative or what we perceive as being negative. And actually in doing that, it kind of messes things up. So, you know, our strong the cultures that we've brought up in, or, maybe especially for, let's not get into the male female thing, but, I suppose strong resilience. Resilience to me is just like stoical, and it all sounds a bit dull being really resilient. It's like, well, we don't have to be. It's okay to cry, to be sad, to not feel resilient at all. Like the vulnerability is great as well, and if we can do it and just realize it will flow through us and something will change, then it's okay.
Yeah, it's like I want to be really tough and brave, and therefore I'm not going to call myself depressed. I've had a
Yeah.
similar experience where I was labeling myself as like I'm just in a grumpy mood all week. It's like maybe it's something else. um,
I remember
where
once. I remember
Okay, go
once.
ahead.
I was once married and resisting that it wasn't working, and I think finally we decided it was probably the end of the road. And I remember sharing it with my mum and her saying, "You're a Darke. You're tough. You can get through this." It made me kind of think my surname is Darke. It made me think, actually, how much do we take on through our ancestry as well, and this kind of idea of how we should be or what we pick up through our, not just through our childhood, but what goes back through generations of our genetics and our kind of energetic imprint, and that we're still carrying. So that's an interesting one as well.
Yeah, wow. And yeah, all the expectations, and I mean the epigenetics is fascinating, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface. um
Yeah.
my wife, she goes through these moments where she's feeling all kinds of emotions or having just really intense experiences, and I'm like, well, what is going on? Like, it's not related. to our life. And she's like, this feels like I'm clearing my grandmother's PTSD,
Yeah.
where she talks about it, like the whole line of her family, and it's like stopping with her. And it can be pretty intense for me to to have to hold that and have no idea, exactly what's experienced going on. But
Yeah, I clearly don't know the answers to none of us do to this, but there's something fascinating in it. And I've been part of healing processes or kind of retreat work where I have a memory of something I once did in Edinburgh in Scotland. It was being held in a yoga center, and I remember lying on the floor of the yoga center for 2 days, just absolutely crying and crying and crying, and with images of this kind of almost like medieval scene where houses were being burned and women were being raped, and I don't know where it came from. It felt like it was a kind of ancestral thing. And at the end of that week, I felt a lot better, but I don't know what went on or how to explain it. Who knows? There's so much we don't know.
yeah. Where would you like to direct people to find out more about you or to support any of the stuff that you're doing?
I'm really bad at this stuff. But I do have a website. I haven't updated it forever and a day. But my website is Karen Darke. So Karen with a K, Darke with an E on the end.com. Quest 79 also has a website where some of the stories are shared, and we have a newsletter that goes out there sharing some of these inspiring stories that people have been doing to hopefully spread that. So if people want to sign up there, that would be great, and then you can get just once a month there's an update, and we have a free monthly event that people can join to sort of explore topics. And
Oh,
yeah,
great.
that'd be great. So that the website for that is just quest 79.com.
Brilliant.
And that website also needs updating.
Websites, they always need updating.
I know.
Karen, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been really fun.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for having me. Thanks for a nice, interesting exploration of things.
Yeah, my pleasure.